My dad told me not to show my face at the family dinner. That was the very first thing he said when I picked up the phone. No hello. No, how are you? Just the verdict. He called 3 days before the New Year dinner. I remember the exact moment because I was standing in the driveway outside the volunteer rebuild site in Columbus, Ohio. My gloves still on, sawdust still stuck in my eyelashes, and the cold air sharp enough to make breathing feel optional. I almost laughed when I heard his tone. Not from humor, from the absurdity of being spoken to like a trespasser on my own family's property. My dad said that Vanessa would be bringing her new boyfriend to meet them, family, and that this dinner mattered. He paused just long enough for the implication to land. This was apparently an event reserved for people who, unlike me, would not embarrass anyone. I asked what he meant. Not defensively, more like someone double-checking the instructions on a machine they had used for years, but suddenly no longer recognized. Before he could answer, my mom's voice floated into the call. Light, sweet, sharp as a razor hidden in frosting. She said that with the work I did lately, it might be better if I sat this one out. She said Vanessa deserved a night where the focus stayed on her and not on questions about what I was doing with my life. She said people might misunderstand my choices. She said all of that in the same tone she used when I was 12, and she told me perhaps I should not audition for choir because I was more of a listener than a performer. I could hear wind blowing across the phone from their end, probably from the porch where they always made calls they did not want. Overheard. Probably from the exact spot where they had rehearsed this little speech. My dad came back on the line and finished the job. If you care about this family, do not show your face. I stood there like an idiot, phone still pressed to my ear, staring at the side of a half-restored duplex and the pile of lumber that needed sorting. My hands were not shaking. That surprised me. Usually betrayals come with physical symptoms. This one landed with a strange calm. Cold water poured into a clear glass. No bubbles, no splash. I told him one word. Goodbye. Not a plea, not a question. Just a confirmation that I had heard exactly what he meant. Then I tapped the screen and ended the call before he could pretend the conversation had gone differently. If you are still listening by this point, thank you. Stories like this are not pleasant to hear, but they become easier when we do not go through them alone. Now let me tell you what happened next. The workers behind me were swinging back into motion. Someone shouted for a measuring tape. Someone else cursed because a plank had cracked. I slipped the phone into my coat pocket, pressed my gloves together to knock off the frost, and returned to the 2x4s that needed sanding. The rebuild project was part of a long-running community initiative that repaired homes for families who had been hit by the last winter storm. I had volunteered there every week for almost a year. People often assumed I did it because I lacked direction or could not find real work. My parents certainly assumed that. They saw a photo of me carrying drywall on a Saturday morning and concluded I had abandoned my career. They built an entire narrative about how I was drifting, failing, settling. Their version of me had become so complete in their minds that my actual life no longer fit in it. There is something oddly liberating about being misunderstood. When people decide who you are without evidence, you no longer owe them explanations. I learned that the hard way. The cold bit at my cheeks while I worked. The boards were rough beneath my palms. The rhythmic scrape of sandpaper steadied me. I focused on the feel of each stroke. The tiny curls of wood lifting away. The faint scent of pine rising through the freezing air. Manual work has a clarity to it. Nothing ambiguous. Nothing emotional. A board is either level or it is not. A joint fits or it does not. Families do not function with that elegance. The silence after the call kept replaying itself. Not the words. The silence. The way they both seemed so comfortable excluding me from an occasion that used to be automatic. As if I were a distant relative or a neighbor they barely tolerated. As if the dinner were not the same New Year meal we had shared every year since I was born. My seat at that table had once been guaranteed. Now it was conditional. And the condition was that I disappear. I knew they had always preferred Vanessa. That part never stung. Preference is human. But this was different. This had contours. This had weight. This was rejection with structure and purpose. My dad's tone had made that clear. A gust of wind pushed through the worksite and rattled the loose sheets of insulation. Someone asked me to help lift a beam. I nodded and took my side of it. The weight settled across my forearms. It felt good to hold something solid when everything else had shifted. While we carried the beam inside, my mind kept running through the last decade of small moments that now rearranged themselves with new meaning. The way Mom spoke of Vanessa's accomplishments as if they were communal. Victor. The way my dad asked me about my life, with the same tone he used when asking a mechanic whether the car might last another season. The way they never asked questions beyond the surface. People assume wounds come from single incidents. They do not. They come from patterns. 1,000 tiny dismissals. A lifetime of being the daughter who could take care of herself while the other daughter needed constant attention. I set the beam down and straightened my back. My breath fogged in the air. The day was bright but unforgiving, the kind of winter light that reveals every flaw in the wood grain and every truth you have tried to ignore. I brushed the sawdust off my sleeves and looked around the half-finished structure. Most of the volunteers were retirees or college kids on break. None of them knew what I actually did for a living. None of them cared. They cared that I could lift, measure, and stay focused. Skills that had nothing to do with the law degree framed on my office wall. I sometimes wondered what my parents thought happened to that degree. Did they imagine I left it on a bus? Did they assume I threw it in a drawer? Or did they believe that if they ignored it long enough, it might stop being real? A long time ago, I used to correct their assumptions. I used to try to explain who I was beyond the story they had written for me. Eventually, I stopped. Not out of anger. Out of understanding. You cannot force someone to see you. You can only stop standing in their line of sight. I reached for another board and placed it onto the sawhorses. The grain was smooth this time, easier to work. I pressed the sandpaper down and began again, steady and methodical. Each pass cleared a little more of the roughness. Each stroke felt like an answer to a question I no longer needed to ask. As the hours passed, the sting of the phone call faded into something more defined. Not pain. Not even anger. Something like recognition. A piece of truth that had always been there, finally stepping into the light. It was not the dinner they did not want me at. It was the life around that dinner. The dynamic. The hierarchy. The unspoken rules I had followed since childhood. It was useful as long as I stayed in the background. The moment I stepped out of that script even slightly, they corrected the error. The sky grew pale toward late afternoon. The cold thickened. A volunteer handed me a thermos of coffee and I took a grateful sip. The bitterness grounded me. The steam warmed my face. I thought about calling them back. Not to argue, just to hear whether his voice softened or her tone changed. But I did not. The urge passed as quickly as it came. Their message had been clear, crystal clear, nothing to reinterpret. Later, while loading tools into the truck, I felt something settle inside me, a shift in weight. A decision forming without fanfare. If they wanted distance, I could give them oceans. Not out of spite, out of respect for the boundary they had drawn. The street lamps flickered on as I locked up the supply shed. Snow began to drift across the pavement. Soft at first, then steadier. The kind of snowfall that quiets entire neighborhoods. I stood there for a moment, watching the flakes gather on the roofline of the duplex. My phone vibrated once in my pocket. A calendar reminder for the New Year dinner. A standing event I had never missed. I slid the notification away with a single thumb swipe. Gone. Just like that. I walked to my car with the deliberate slowness of someone testing new ground. The air stung my lungs. My boots crunched against the snow. I turned the engine on and let the heater fight its slow battle against the 2020 cold. As I pulled out of the lot, the street looked different. Wider. Quieter. Or maybe I was the one who had changed in the span of a single afternoon. Sometimes clarity arrives disguised as rejection. Sometimes rejection is the only language a family speaks fluently. By the time I reached home, the sky had turned a deep blue, the kind that makes the world feel both sharp and distant. I unlocked my apartment, kicked off my boots, and let the silence wrap around me. A clean silence. Not empty, not lonely, just honest. I set my gloves on the radiator to dry. My fingers still tingled from the cold, but they felt steady. Very steady. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. That was the moment I realized they did not just reject my job, they rejected me. I stood in my kitchen for a long moment after the truth settled. Then I pushed away from the counter because standing still made the room feel smaller. I rinsed the glass, set it upside down to dry, and walked toward the living room. The quiet followed me through the hallway like an old habit. It reminded me of another kind of quiet, the one I grew up with, the one that shaped everything that came after. People assume childhood memories come back in warm colors. Mine return in cool tones. Pale blue, soft gray, that muted gold light you see in late autumn when the sun is tired. The memories themselves are not painful. They are just precise. I was 8 when I first noticed the pattern, though I did not have the language for it then. Vanessa won some awards at school. I think it was for a speech contest about the importance of recycling. But what mattered was not the subject. What mattered was the reaction. I remember Mom rushing around the kitchen, brushing flour off her hands, telling me to grab her camera because this was important. My dad was already in the car honking for us to move faster. Vanessa stood in the doorway with perfect posture and perfect hair, and that perfect smile she had practiced so often in the mirror. She looked like she belonged under a spotlight even before she walked onto a backstage. And I stood behind her holding her coat. No one told me to. It simply felt like the correct configuration of the family. The applause from that day stayed with me. Not the sound itself, but the way my parents glowed when they talked about it. The way people congratulated them like they had produced something extraordinary. The way Mom kept saying Vanessa needed support right now. I would hear that phrase again and again over the years. It became a small hammer, tapping rhythmically, shaping the contours of our family. I tried to think of a moment when they spoke that way about me. Something small. Anything. If such a moment existed, it did not survive long enough for my memory to preserve. The years went by. Vanessa performed. Vanessa excelled. Vanessa required attention like a delicate houseplant that wilted if you looked away for too long. And I was the child who did not wilt. That was my defining trait. Lack of need. When I was in high school, I stopped asking them to come to my events. Not because they refused. They never refused. They simply forgot, or arrived late, or arrived early and left before anything happened, or stayed but spent the time whispering about some new crisis in Vanessa's orbit. I learned to attend alone. I learned to clap for myself. You get good at that when you practice long enough. I was in college when the truth sharpened. My graduation ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday morning in May. I had worked through most of my classes, taken extra shifts at a diner on Broad Street, and saved enough to pay for books and groceries without asking them for help. I was proud in a quiet, contained way. That morning, Mom called me from the car. I remember the sound of traffic behind her. She said there had been a change of plans. Vanessa had been invited to give a speech at some leadership conference in Cincinnati, and they needed to drive her there immediately. She told me she hoped I understood. She told me they would take me to dinner the next weekend to celebrate. Vanessa needs us more. She said it just like that, as if needs were currency and mine were less valuable. I sat on the edge of my dorm bed holding the phone. I did not cry. My hands did not shake. I simply understood the equation. One daughter needed investment, the other did not. And if you only have so much time and energy, you invest where you believe the return will be highest. Graduation itself passed quickly. I walked across the stage, took my diploma, and returned to my seat. The applause sounded thin from where I sat. Afterward, I stood outside with other graduates, watching their families hand them flowers and snap photos and talk about bright futures. I held my gown closed at the neck because the wind kept blowing it open. I waited a few minutes longer than necessary before leaving. I waited even though I knew no one was coming. Later that night, I bought myself a small slice of chocolate cake from a grocery store. I lit a candle on top and set it on the windowsill. Not a celebration. More of a marker. A quiet acknowledgement that I had reached a milestone, even if no one else noticed. The thing about patterns is that once you recognize them, you start seeing them everywhere. In how they asked about Vanessa's classes, but never mine. In how they updated relatives about Vanessa's achievements, but paused when someone asked about me. searching for something to say. In how they praised Vanessa's confidence but treated my independence like a sign that I needed less love. I brushed those thoughts aside and returned to the present because the past has a way of expanding if you let it. I turned on the light in my living room, walked to the small desk near the window, and opened my laptop. The screen glowed softly, pulling me back into my life as it currently existed, a life my parents never bothered to understand. My work inbox had a handful of messages from clients waiting for documents related to trust administration. One in particular needed attention. I opened Samuel Reed's file. His grandfather had passed away earlier that autumn, leaving a substantial estate that required careful distribution. Samuel had questions about a clause regarding charitable disbursements. I reviewed the language, made a few notes, drafted a response, and attached the revised documents. The work steadied me. Clarity always did. I leaned back in my chair and looked around my office. It was not large. Just a clean space with shelves of legal binders, a few framed certificates, and a window that overlooked the street. The room smelled faintly of copy paper. There was a small plant on the sill that I kept forgetting to water. Somehow it had survived anyway. People assumed being a trust attorney was glamorous. It was not. It was detail-oriented, repetitive, and required a level of emotional neutrality that felt like holding your breath for long periods. But it also gave me something I had craved since childhood: structure, rules, predictability. Inheritance did not care about parental favoritism. Numbers did not shift based on mood. Documents did not overlook me. While reviewing another set of papers, my mind flicked back to my parents again. Not because of the call, but because of the disconnect. They had constructed an entire story about my life with missing information, and then punished me for not fitting the script. It had been this way for years. I let it continue, because correcting misconceptions requires effort, and opening yourself to disappointment. Silence requires nothing. I glanced at the clock. It was close to 10. The street outside was quiet. A thin layer of frost had begun to form on the parked cars. I closed my laptop, stretched my arms, and exhaled a long breath I had not realized I was holding. It occurred to me that there was a peculiar symmetry in all of this. My parents believed Vanessa needed them more. They believed I required nothing. They believed I floated through life untouched by complications. They never saw the nights I stayed up reviewing case files to cover bills they assumed someone else paid. They never saw the mornings I arrived early to court because no one was coming, to sit in the back row for support. They never saw me because they never looked at me directly. I walked to the kitchen and filled a mug with water, heating it until steam curled upward. I wrapped my hands around the mug for warmth. The ceramic radiated heat slowly, spreading across my palms, reminding me that comfort sometimes arrives in the simplest forms. I took a cautious sip and let the heat settle in my chest. Standing there in the kitchen, surrounded by the quiet of a life I had built alone, I felt a small, unexpected calm. Not the numbness from earlier, but something steadier. Recognition again, the kind that comes when you acknowledge a truth without flinching. This was not about money. It had never been about money. It was about proximity. Attention. Who receives it, and who is expected to live without it? I walked back to the window and looked down at the street. A single car drove by, its headlights sweeping across the pavement. The city was silent in that particular winter way, as though everyone had retreated into their homes and shut the world out for the night. I thought about Vanessa, about how effortlessly she occupied space, how people leaned toward her, wanting to be near her brightness, how she learned early that attention was a resource she could command, and how I learned early that disappearing caused the least trouble. A strange clarity settled over me again. Everything that happened in that phone call earlier was just an extension of the same old pattern. They were simply speaking the truth they had been living for decades. They raised one daughter to be admired, the other to be ignored. I stood at the window a little longer after the thought settled, watching the streetlights flicker against the frost. The quiet held, steady and familiar, and for a moment, I let myself breathe into it. Then I turned away and got ready for work, because Monday did not pause for emotional revelations. It never had. Morning in my office building in downtown Columbus had its own rhythm. Elevators dinging, people clutching coffee cups like life preservers, the faint smell of carpet cleaner that somehow never faded. I walked in just after 8, hung my coat on the hook behind the door, and set my briefcase on the desk. The space looked exactly as I had left it the night before. Neat. Contained. A version of myself that my parents had never bothered to imagine. Most people who meet me here assume I come from a family of professionals. They see the framed certification from the Ohio Bar, the law degree from the Ohio State University, the carefully organized shelf of estate planning reference books. They assume I grew up discussing trusts and wills at the dinner table. They do not picture me hauling plywood on weekends or being told not to show my face at the family New Year dinner, because my work might embarrass someone. I checked the clock. 8:15. Samuel Reed was scheduled for 8:30. I pulled up his file and reviewed the notes. His grandfather had left behind a sizable estate with a trust that contained several unusual clauses, including one that restricted disbursements until certain charitable goals were met. Samuel was in his 30s, polite in a nervous way, and this would be his second meeting with me. He liked clear explanations. I liked clear clients. It worked. He arrived a few minutes early, knocking lightly on the open door. I stood to greet him. He shook my hand with that same tentative grip he had last time, as though afraid any misstep might trigger a legal alarm. "Thank you for seeing me again," he said. "I know this stuff is straightforward for you, but it is a maze for me." I gestured toward the chair. "Sit. Trusts are only straightforward after you have read 800 of them." He gave a half laugh and settled in. He wore a navy sweater that still had the crease from being folded. His hair was combed so precisely it almost looked drawn on. Some people face grief by becoming messy. Others face it by becoming exact. Samuel clearly belonged in the second category. We reviewed the trust language line by line. I explained how his grandfather's charitable stipulations operated, what timelines applied, and which distributions required trustee approval. He listened closely, taking notes in a small notebook. He had beautiful handwriting, round and precise, like someone who grew up with teachers who praised neat penmanship. At one point, he asked if his grandfather had been within his rights to place so many conditions on the trust. I told him he had. People often think inheritances are gifts. They are not. They are instructions delivered across time. When we finished, he thanked me again. He said he appreciated how clearly I explained things. I nodded. Clarity was the one thing I could always offer, even when my own life lacked it. After he left, I sat back in my chair and exhaled. My office was quiet, the kind of quiet that steadies your pulse. I reached for the mug at the corner of my desk, took a sip of lukewarm coffee, and let my eyes drift to the photo on the shelf. It was from a volunteer rebuild weekend in October. I was wearing heavy work boots, paint smeared across one sleeve, my hair tucked under a knit cap. One of the other volunteers had snapped the photo while I was holding a power drill and laughing at something someone had said off camera. The moment was ordinary. That was why I liked it. Mom had seen that photo a few weeks after it was posted, not through a conversation with me. Someone else showed it to her at church. She called me later that evening, her voice soaked in that syrupy concern she used when she was pretending to ask, but really declaring. She asked if I was working construction now. She asked if I was doing it because I could not find legal work. She asked if I needed money. She asked all of this without pausing long enough to hear the answers. When I told her it was volunteer work, she let out a sound that fell somewhere between relief and disappointment. She said a woman with my education should be careful not to confuse people. They might think I had taken a wrong turn. They might think I lacked ambition. They might think I settled. What she really meant was that she did not want them to think she had failed. I listened quietly, holding the phone to my ear with one hand while tightening a loose screw on my desk drawer with the other. I did not argue. There was no point. My parents had built an image of me based on selective observations. Correcting it would require them to look more closely. They had spent a lifetime avoiding that. After that call, I stopped posting photos from volunteer work, not because I was ashamed of it, because sometimes the safest thing you can do is let people hold on to them. Version of you they can handle, even if it is wrong, especially if it is wrong. I glanced again at the picture. The me in the photo looked unburdened, free in a way I seldom felt in the presence of my family. Manual work did that. It cleared out the noise. My mind drifted back to another memory, a Saturday afternoon a few years ago. I had taken the train to visit my parents for a weekend. Vanessa was there too, sitting at the kitchen table scrolling on her phone while Mom made tea. My dad had stepped out to rake leaves. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and old carpet. Mom turned to Vanessa and said she had found a wonderful article about women in leadership. She said it reminded her of Vanessa's potential. She said Vanessa needed to stay focused on her goals. Then she looked at me and smiled politely. The kind of polite smile you give a stranger at a bus stop. I had just passed the bar exam. They knew. They had mentioned it once in a congratulatory text that arrived 2 days late and contained exactly 8 words. I am proud of you. Good job. Love you. You could feel the distance in each syllable. Yet in that kitchen, on that afternoon, my new career did not fit into the family conversation. It hovered in the air like steam from a kettle that no one bothered to notice. Vanessa needs us more. Mom had said that for years, and every time she said it, something in me stiffened. A small truth pressed into my spine. Need was not the issue. Attention was. And attention flows toward the loudest source. The loudest source had never been me. I shook off the memory and returned my focus to the present. My computer chimed with an incoming message. Another client needing clarification on a probate deadline. I opened the file, reviewed the timeline, and typed a response with practiced efficiency. The law required precision. Families rarely did. That difference had always made the work feel safe. After sending the email, I checked the time. It was nearing lunchtime. My stomach reminded me I had skipped breakfast. I grabbed my coat and stepped out into the hallway. The air in the lobby was warmer than outside, but still carried the faint chill of winter. I walked toward the small cafe across the street. The pavement glittered with frost, and the sky was a crisp sheet of pale blue. Cars passed in slow intervals. The city felt suspended, caught between seasons. At the cafe, I ordered tomato soup and a half sandwich. The woman behind the counter recognized me and asked how work was going. I told her it was steady. She nodded, as if that answer made perfect sense. Sometimes that was all I needed. Someone who accepted the simplest truth without adding their own interpretation. I carried the tray to a table by the window. Outside, people hurried by in thick coats, heads bowed against the wind. I sipped the soup slowly, letting the warmth settle into my chest. While I ate, my mind returned again to the phone call from my parents. Not the words this time, the tone. The assumption that I would comply. The belief that my life existed as an accessory to someone else's story. The irony was sharp. They believed I had abandoned ambition. They believed I had drifted. They believed I lived without purpose. They believed I had taken a wrong turn. Yet I had more structure in my daily life than they ever gave me growing up. My work required discipline. My weekends required grit. My choices required independence. They knew none of that because they had never asked. Curiosity requires interest. Interest requires care. Care requires presence. They had always been present for Vanessa, and in their minds, that had counted as enough. I finished my lunch, placed the tray on the return cart, and stepped back into the cold. The wind slapped my cheeks awake. I tucked my hands into my pockets as I crossed the street. Back in my office, I removed my coat and sat down again. I pulled a file from the stack on my desk. A new client. Another trust to review. Another set of instructions from someone who believed their legacy could be controlled with conditions and clauses. I smiled faintly at the thought. Legacies are strange things. They reach farther than people realize. They shape lives quietly, silently, in ways the creators never intended. Sometimes they protect, sometimes they wound. Sometimes they do both at once. As I flipped through the documents, I felt a small tug at the back of my mind. A thought forming, but not yet complete. Something about the pattern of misunderstandings. Something about how long I had let them believe whatever they wanted. Something about the safety that came from not correcting them. I reached for my pen and made a note in the margin of the file, not related to the case. Just a reminder to myself. A reminder that truth does not always need defending. I leaned back, exhaled, and looked once more at the photo on the shelf. The paint on my sleeve. The drill in my hand. The unguarded laugh. The version of me my parents refused to see. I let them believe what they wanted. I did not know Grandma had been doing the same. The thought stayed with me long after the office lights dimmed that evening. It followed me out to the parking lot, into my car, and all the way to my apartment, as if it had climbed into the passenger seat and buckled itself in. By the time I unlocked my door and stepped inside, I could feel something old stirring, something I had tucked away for years without examining too closely. I hung my coat on the back of a chair and walked toward the small fireproof safe tucked into the corner of my bedroom closet. It was not large. just a matte black box with a combination lock that clicked softly when I turned the dial. Most people keep jewelry or passports in safes. I kept documents, papers handed to me by a woman who rarely explained anything she did. The metal door swung open with a quiet groan. The file labeled Whitfield Trust sat exactly where I had left it. I did not pull it out. Not yet. I only rested my hand on the folder and let the past come forward one, controlled, inch at a time. I was 10 the summer Grandma Eleanor stayed with us after her knee surgery. She occupied the guest room on the first floor, where the windows faced the old maple tree and the morning sun made soft rectangles of gold on the carpet. She spoke little. She watched a lot. Her silence was not cold. It was observing, measuring, weighing, the way a jeweler examines a stone to see where the imperfections run. Vanessa was 12 then, already glowing with the promise of being admired. She moved through the house like a small monarch, expecting attention to trail behind her. Maybe that is unkind. Maybe she was simply reflecting the way my parents treated her. Either way, Grandma saw it all. She sat in that armchair with a quilt tucked over her knees, sipping peppermint tea and watching the household like a scientist studying the behavior of creatures in a glass enclosure. One afternoon, Vanessa burst into the room with the force of a gust of summer wind. She carried a catalog from some trendy store at the mall. Bright colors, glossy pages. She held it open to a dress priced at more than anything I had ever owned. She wanted the dress. She needed the dress. She could not live without the dress. Her words tumbled out like a waterfall. She said it was for a party. She said everyone else would be wearing something new. She said she could not possibly show up looking like she always did. Grandma listened quietly. She did not interrupt. She did not frown. She simply observed, her fingertips resting lightly on the rim of her teacup. When Vanessa finally paused for breath, Grandma asked how much the dress cost. Vanessa told her proudly. A number that made my eyes widen. A number that could have bought school supplies for an entire classroom. Grandma nodded slowly, as though confirming something she had suspected. Then she shook her head once. A simple gesture. A quiet no. Vanessa stared at her, stunned. My parents had never told her no unless there was no possible way to say yes. Even then they softened it, dressed it up, and tried to make it feel like a misunderstanding instead of a boundary. Why not? Vanessa asked, indignant, as if refusal was a foreign concept. She demanded an explanation. Grandma offered none. She simply said it was not a purchase she wanted to make. Vanessa stormed out of the room, catalog clutched dramatically to her chest, muttering under her breath about unfairness and favoritism and how nobody understood her. Footsteps pounded up the stairs. A door slammed. I stayed behind. Something about the moment tugged at me. It was the first time I had ever seen anyone deny Vanessa anything without apology. It felt like watching a pillar of the house shift. Grandma set her cup down with deliberate care and looked at me. Her eyes were not unkind. They were sharper than I expected, as though she had removed a veil and could finally examine me clearly. "Walk with me," she said. She used a cane then, so our pace was slow. We moved through the hallway and out to the back porch where the cicadas hummed in long, rising waves. She lowered herself into the wooden rocking chair, motioning for me to sit on the steps. "Money is not complicated," she said. "People make it complicated." I did not know what to say, so I waited. Money reveals character. That is all it does. It shows you what someone values, what someone fears, what someone cannot resist. Some people treat it as freedom. Others treat it as proof. The cruelest mistake is when they treat it as identity. Her voice was calm, quiet, the opposite of the lectures my parents liked to give, which always spiraled into tangents about responsibility and sacrifice, until the meaning blurred. "Your sister believes money is access," Grandma said. "She believes if she gets what she wants, when she wants it, the world will keep proving she is special. But that is not how life works. Special is measured when there is nothing to gain, not when everything is being handed to you." I looked down at my shoes, scuffed from playing in the backyard earlier. "And you," she said, watching me as if the words mattered more here, "believe money is something you should not need. You think if you need less, you will burden no one. You hide your needs to protect others. But that is not how strength works." I felt heat rise in my face. I did not know how she saw these things. I had never said them out loud. She leaned forward slightly. One day, someone in this family will need you to say no. I frowned. I was 10. I did not understand the warning tucked inside her voice. Say no to what? She only shook her head. You will know. A breeze rustled the leaves overhead. A dog barked far down the street. Grandma did not elaborate. She simply settled back into her chair and closed her eyes as if the matter were decided. I carried that conversation lightly then, like a pebble in a pocket. Interesting. Unusual. Easy to forget. Children rarely understand the power in what adults choose not to explain. Years later, when I sat beside her hospital bed during her last winter, she did the same thing. She asked me about my classes, though I had already graduated. She asked whether I still saved every receipt, even when no one needed to see it. She asked if I had learned how to say no yet. I told her I was working on it. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that appears when someone has solved a puzzle that was never meant to be obvious. She did not bring up Vanessa. Not once. That silence should have meant more to me at the time. It means everything now. Standing by the open safe, the memory felt sharper than it had in years, as if the edges had been waiting for the right moment to cut through. I finally lifted the Whitfield Trust folder from the safe and carried it to the kitchen table. The cover was a deep forest green, embossed with her initials in gold. She had given it to me privately. No ceremony, no dramatic reveal. Just her hand on mine as she slid the folder across the table during a quiet afternoon 2 summers before she passed. She said only that it was something I should keep safe. That was all. No explanation, no justification. Silence wrapped around her decisions like twine. I opened the folder now. The documents rested in orderly stacks. Legal language, amendments, signatures, dates stretching back more than 15 years. It did not matter how many times I had read them. Each time revealed something new. The trust was irrevocable. The assets were significant. The stipulations were precise. Every clause angled toward one clear purpose: to protect Vanessa from inheriting more than she could handle, to protect the family from its own blind spots, to place responsibility in the hands of someone who would not bend under pressure, manipulation, or sentiment. That last part used to confuse me. It does not anymore. I traced the corner of one page with my thumb, feeling the faint ridge of the printed text. The lamp above the table cast a warm circle of light across the file, turning the edges of the pages soft and gold. It reminded me of the sunlight on the carpet in that guest room where Grandma watched everything in silence. I realized then what her silence had actually been. Not distance, not disapproval. Preparation. A slow, steady shaping of my understanding, long before I knew I would need it. People imagine inheritance as something given, but sometimes inheritance is something guarded. Sometimes it is the duty to prevent harm rather than distribute gifts. Sometimes it is the quiet authority to say no when everyone else says yes. I sat back in the chair and let that truth settle in my chest like a stone, dropped into deep water. Heavy. Certain. Final. I was never trained to inherit. I was trained to stop inheritance from destroying people. 5 days passed after my dad told me not to show my face. 5 days of quiet mornings and long hours at the office. 5 days of feeling the bruise without touching it. Silence has its own temperature. Mine had settled somewhere between cold understanding and something that felt almost like relief. On the 5th morning, just past 7, my doorbell rang. One sharp chime that broke the stillness of my kitchen where I had been, standing with a cup of coffee cooling in my hands. I did not jump. I did not hurry. I set the cup down and walked toward the door with the same steady pace I used when approaching a witness stand, neither rushed nor hesitant. Through the peephole, I saw all 4 of them, my dad, my mom, Vanessa, and a man I recognized only from a handful of photos, the ones Vanessa had posted with captions about ambition and fate. Grant Holloway. He was taller than I expected, handsomer too, in a polished way that suggested he took excellent care of his appearance, and only moderate care of his integrity. I opened the door. No one spoke. My dad's jaw was set in a line I had seen only a few times in my life, usually after he realized something costly too late. My mom's expression flickered between panic and indignation, the combination she used whenever social consequences were involved. Vanessa looked stunned, eyes wide, lips parted as if the air had betrayed her, and Grant stared at me with a focus that made the hair at the nape of my neck lift slightly. Then he asked the question. No introduction, no greeting. Just the question that told me everything I needed to know about why they were standing at my door before sunrise. You're the trustee. You control her money. His voice had a polished confidence that did not match his words. In fact, that confidence cracked right through the middle as soon as he said the word, to her. He did not bother pretending the trust was for anyone else. He had done his homework, just not enough of it. I watched Vanessa turn toward him slowly, as if she was moving through water. Her shock was not graceful. It was real. She whispered something like, "What do you mean?" But the sound barely left her throat. My dad looked at my mom. A small movement, but telling. It was the look of a man who realizes his assumptions had been built on a foundation he never inspected. My mom pressed her lips together until the color drained out of them. She did not defend me. She did not speak. She never did when reality contradicted the version of life she preferred to. Present. Grant stepped forward slightly, and that was when the second thing happened. The accidental confession. The part he had not meant to say aloud. The sound slipped from him too quickly to catch, too honestly to deny. Then I need to marry her, not you. The silence that followed was a physical thing. It settled over all of us in a heavy, unmistakable weight. My dad's shoulders stiffened. My mom's eyes widened in humiliation. Vanessa made a small broken sound, the kind she used to make when her favorite toy disappeared unexpectedly. Grant realized he had spoken too quickly and tried to backpedal, but the words were already in the air between us, like a stain that could not be scrubbed out. He looked at me, then at Vanessa, then back at me again. Something calculating moved across his expression. I could almost hear the equation forming behind his eyes. A woman who controlled $45 million in trust assets versus a woman who had been raised to expect everything without understanding any of it. My own voice surprised me with how calm it sounded. "Do you want to come inside?" No one answered at first. They just stared as if waiting for someone else to decide what to do. My dad cleared his throat, a sound too rehearsed to be genuine. My mom touched Vanessa's arm in a gesture that was meant to be comforting, but looked more like she was making sure Vanessa did not fall over. Grant spoke finally. "Yes, we need to talk." I stepped back so they could enter. My apartment was small but clean, warm from the heater that clicked on each morning before I woke. A stack of case files sat on the kitchen table. My winter coat hung near the door. It was not impressive, not staged, not curated. It was simply my life. My parents hesitated, glancing around in quick disapproval. Not disgusted, just the subtle judgment of people who believed adulthood should look like a catalog photo. Vanessa walked in last, her gaze sweeping the room as if searching for something that made sense. Her hair was curled in soft waves. Her makeup was perfect for 7 in the morning. She had dressed for a conversation she expected to win. Grant stood beside her, hands in the pockets of an expensive jacket. He looked impatient. Impatience is always revealing. I motioned toward the small living area. "Sit wherever you'd like." My dad chose the edge of the couch. My mom sat next to him, but at a slight angle, as if still deciding whether she belonged in the room. Vanessa remained standing until Grant nudged her gently toward a chair. I waited, not out of politeness. Observation is quiet work. Grant spoke first, gesturing sharply toward me. "So is it true? You're the trustee. You're the one holding the assets." Vanessa turned quickly toward him. Holding what assets? She looked genuinely confused. Whatever she believed my financial life contained, it had never included anything close to the truth. He ignored her question. His attention stayed locked on me. "The Whitfield Trust, the one your grandmother established. The one designated for Vanessa. The one worth $45 million. My mom gasped, a thin sound that escaped before she could swallow it. My dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees, like a man bracing for impact, and Vanessa froze in place entirely. My voice stayed steady. "Yes, that is correct." No one breathed. I did not elaborate. I did not justify. Truth does not become more real by being padded with explanation. Vanessa finally found her voice, but it came out brittle as glass. Grandma left me money. You never said anything. Why would you never tell me? She looked at our parents as if they might rescue her from the question. My mom swallowed hard. Her eyes darted between each of us. She had always been the keeper of family narratives, shaping facts into whatever made us look more presentable. We thought it was a small trust. We did not know the details. We assumed it was not significant. She was lying. Not fully lying, but lying enough to protect pride. They had seen the trust documents, or at least the summary. They knew it existed. They simply thought it was modest, the kind of thing that covered college tuition or a first home, not something that reshaped a life. Grant stepped forward. So you control it, not them, not her. You. It was not a question. Yes, I said. He let out a short breath that sounded almost like relief. The type of relief that says a plan has fallen apart and a new one must be built quickly. Vanessa shook her head, the movement small at first, then sharper. Why would Grandma make you the trustee? You were not even the older daughter. My dad stiffened at that. My mom looked down at her hands. The question should not have been directed at me. It should have been directed at the two people who had raised us so differently. That responsibility became an invisible inheritance. I answered anyway, because she trusted me to say no. The meaning landed. I saw it in the way my dad looked away, and in the tight swallow my mom tried to hide. Vanessa stared at me as if the floor had tilted under her feet. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Say no to what? Grant cut in sharply before I could respond. To release funds, to approve distributions, to give access to the entire trust. Trusts do not function without oversight, Vanessa. Someone has to be the gatekeeper. He spoke with authority, but no warmth. That was when I saw it clearly. He had not just done research. He had done targeted research. The kind done by someone expecting to benefit. Vanessa turned toward him, panic rising at the edges of her voice. Why would you even know that? Why would you dig into my trust? His mask slipped a little, but not enough for her to see. It is standard due diligence. You said your family had assets. I checked. That is what responsible partners do. Responsible partners do not show up at 7 a.m. at the home of a woman they barely know. But I did not say that out loud. He turned back to me. What are the conditions? There must be conditions. No trust is that large without restrictions. I looked at him calmly. There are several, all tied to stability, employment, and independence. Vanessa must meet certain benchmarks before any major distributions are approved. Vanessa flinched. I do not need benchmarks. It is my trust. Grant's response came too quickly. It is your trust, but her power. He nodded toward me. Without her approval, you cannot touch a cent. It was the kind of truth that drops like a stone into water. Clean, heavy, unavoidable. My mom whispered something about discussing this privately. My dad said my name once, low, as if hoping I would smooth everything over the way I used to when conflict made him uncomfortable. I stood quietly and walked to the kitchen counter, giving them space to absorb the information. My heartbeat did not change. Calm has a way of becoming its own armor. Grant broke the silence again, tone lower now. So what will it take? What are the requirements? What do you need from her so she can access the funds? Vanessa inhaled sharply. So she can. Not so we can. Not so the family can. So she can. Everything became clear in that moment, even to her. Grant, she said, her voice shaking. You said you loved me. He looked at her, really looked at her, and his expression softened only for a fraction of a second before his eyes slid back to me. Love does not pay bills. His words were too honest, too fast. My dad stood suddenly, anger rising in a way I had not seen in years. My mom put her hand on his arm, but it did little. Grant shifted his weight as if preparing to defend himself. I watched them all, then spoke with the same measured evenness Grandma once used with me. Sit down, all of you. They obeyed out of instinct, not respect. I stepped closer until the silence tightened again. That was when they realized they had banned the wrong daughter. My voice had landed before I even realized I had spoken. It was steady in a way that reminded me of courtroom depositions, the kind where silence does more of the talking than anyone realizes. They obeyed, not because of authority, but because confusion has a way of stripping people of their usual habits. My dad lowered himself onto the couch again, his jaw tight. My mom perched on the edge beside him, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles blanched. Vanessa sank slowly into the chair, her breathing shallow and uneven, and Grant remained standing for a moment longer before he finally chose the farthest seat from me, as though distance might soften whatever consequences were forming. I walked to the table, picked up the green folder I had left there the night before, and returned to the living room. I did not hand it to anyone. I only held it lightly, the way someone holds an answer others are not ready to receive. Let's start with something simple, I said. Something everyone can understand. My dad exhaled hard, the way he used to when summoning patience. Then he asked the question that had been sitting in his eyes since the moment. I opened the door. We are her parents. How is this possible? Not accusatory, just stunned. As if the laws of genetics and the laws of estate planning were supposed to follow the same logic. The trust was created 12 years ago, I said. It has been irrevocable since the day the documents were signed. That means, once it was established, no one could change it. Not Grandma, not any of you, not even Vanessa. My mom frowned deeply. But families change. Circumstances change. Surely something that large can be adjusted. No. Irrevocable means permanent. It means it does not bend for convenience. That was the point. My dad rubbed his forehead. So we never had control. Not at any point. Correct. Vanessa shook her head sharply. That makes no sense. Grandma would have told us. She loved me. She wanted the best for me. I looked at her. She did. That is why she hired professionals to ensure the trust would outlive everything. Argument, every impulse, every bad decision, and every person who assumed they knew better than she did. Grant flinched at that. He tried to hide it, but failed. I continued. Think of the trust like a locked vault. Inside that vault is everything Grandma wanted you to one day have. The vault has rules about when it opens, how much comes out, and what conditions need to be met. She chose the rules, not me. She also chose the person who holds the key. Grant leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. And that is you. Yes. Why? Vanessa demanded. Her voice cracked on the word. Why you and not me? Why you and not them? Because, I said quietly, her decision was not about favoritism. It was about responsibility. Trusts are not rewards. They are safeguards. Someone had to be the guardrail. My mom finally spoke, her voice thin. We assumed you were too busy for things like this. You never said anything. You never asked. The answer hung between us longer than I expected. My dad shifted uncomfortably, but he did not defend himself. He could not. Silence had already done that work. Vanessa sat forward abruptly, her hair falling over one shoulder. She looked from me to the folder in my hands, then back to me with something like desperation. Fine, whatever. So you are the trustee. That means nothing unless you do something with it. Just approve the funds. That is what Grandma wanted. She wanted me to succeed. Success requires structure, not shortcuts. And the trust is structured. Grant scoffed under his breath. It was a soft sound, but not soft enough. Vanessa whipped her head toward him. What was that? He lifted his hand slightly, palms outward. Nothing. I am just saying we can work with structure. Every trust has loopholes. I have dealt with enough high-net-worth families to know that. He said it too confidently. Too easily, as if high-net-worth families were a species he studied professionally. I watched him a moment longer, then turned back to Vanessa. There are no loopholes, not in this one. She stared at me incredulously. There is always a loophole. Not when Grandma closed them herself. That got Grant's attention. What does that mean? It means she built this trust knowing exactly who might try to influence it one day. She planned for strong personalities, for manipulators, for charmers, and for anyone who believed entitlement was a valid argument. Vanessa blinked slowly. absorbing the implication. So what are the conditions? Tell me what I need to do so we can move forward. We. She said it without thinking. I saw it land in her own mind the moment she spoke it. Her cheeks flushed. She corrected herself. So I can move forward. I set the folder on the table and opened it carefully, the way someone opens a door that leads to a room full of consequences. There are 3 primary benchmarks. The first is stable employment, documented for at least 9 consecutive months. Vanessa stared. I have a job. Influencers are not listed in the trust as qualifying employment, she sputtered. It is a business. I create content. I have partnerships. She turned to Grant for support. He avoided her gaze. The trust defines employment as a role with externally verified income, structure, and accountability, I said. It must also be unrelated to any romantic partner. She froze. Grant's expression twitched, the smallest signal that he understood exactly what Grandma had meant when she wrote that clause. The second benchmark is financial independence. No shared accounts, no co-signed loans, no dependence on another person's income. Vanessa's throat tightened. I do not depend on anyone. You have never filed taxes without help, I said gently. That is not judgment, just a fact. The trust requires documentation that you understand and manage your own finances. Her lower lip trembled, but she tried to hide it. And the third, I continued, is stability. No major legal issues. No outstanding debts over a certain threshold. No history of coercion or manipulation in financial matters. Grant stiffened visibly. Vanessa whispered the word debts as if it were foreign. I do not have any. Her voice was small, fragile. My mom shifted in her seat. Her body language changed in an instant. A small twitch. A subtle flinch. I watched her. Vanessa, I said quietly, did you take out any personal loans this past year? She looked at me sharply. No, she looked at our parents. Mom. My mom hesitated, just once. But once was enough. It was for Vanessa's business, she said. A short-term bridge. Her bank required a guarantor. It was supposed to be temporary. My dad closed his eyes briefly. The muscles in his jaw flexed. Grant stared at Vanessa as though recalculating her worth. I waited for a beat, then spoke clearly. The trust requires that all debts be disclosed. Not hidden, not absorbed by others. Disclosed. Vanessa shook her head, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. That is ridiculous. Grandma would not care about something like that. It is my future. My life. Her voice cracked again. I am not 14 anymore. I do not need rules. I leaned back slightly, letting the moment breathe. This is not punishment. It is protection. Protection. She repeated the word as if I had insulted her. You think I need protection. I think everyone does at some point. She pushed herself out of the chair, pacing now, one hand pressed against her forehead. You are ruining my life. I stood slowly, matching her stillness with my own. No, I am protecting it. She stared at me, breathing hard, as if the air itself had turned against her. You are protecting it. The words hung in the room like dust lit by a window beam, slow to settle and impossible to ignore. Vanessa wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, refusing to admit the tear had ever existed. My dad shifted as though he wanted to stand, but could not decide if standing meant siding with her or with me. My mom's fingers twisted together in her lap, a nervous braid she had made her entire life when something cracked inside her. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the past rose up in my mind the way memories do when the present is too, sharp to look at directly. I was 8 the first time my grandma sat me down in her small sunroom, the one that overlooked the backyard where she kept her roses. She had her glasses on top of her head and a ledger open on the table. A real ledger, not the digital kind. Long columns of numbers in her precise handwriting. She pushed it toward me. I barely understood addition then, but she began walking me through it slowly, her finger tapping lightly on the paper. This is not about money, she had said. This is about understanding what flows in and what flows out. Most people only pay attention to what they want to receive. That is how they lose everything they already have. At the time, I thought she was simply teaching me how to track an allowance. It took me years to understand she had been laying down the foundation for something much larger. The memory shifted. I was 11 when she said another sentence that would not make sense until adulthood. I had complained that Vanessa got the new dress, the new tablet, the new set of paints. Grandma looked at me for a long time before she answered. Abundance tests character, she said softly. Absence tests resilience. Both reveal the truth. I did not appreciate the poetry of it then. I only realized later that she had created two entirely different worlds inside the same house. One daughter was raised with attention so constant it became an expectation. The other raised with distance so wide it became self-sufficiency. Back in the living room, Vanessa ran a hand through her hair and sank back into the chair. I watched the denial in her eyes, the kind that forms when someone realizes their entire story of themselves is at risk of collapsing. My mom finally broke. Her voice came out thin, barely audible. Why did she not choose Vanessa? She pressed her fingers to her mouth as soon as she said it, as if she regretted letting the question escape. But it was already too late. It sat there between us, raw and exposed. I took a slow breath. My heartbeat stayed steady, something that surprised me. Usually, conversations like this come with a spike of emotion. But not now. Not after everything that had led to this exact moment. She did, I said. My mom blinked rapidly, confused. My dad looked up as if I had spoken in another language. Grandma did choose Vanessa. She chose her first. She chose her many times. When Vanessa cried, she responded. When Vanessa wanted something, she found a way to give it. When Vanessa struggled, she softened the world around her so she would not break under it. Grandma tested her with abundance, and Vanessa failed every test. Vanessa's mouth fell open slightly, shock blending with indignation. Failed. That is what you think of me. I met her eyes calmly. No judgment, no anger. That is what Grandma saw. Grant shifted in his seat, perhaps realizing that every assumption he had made about this family was built on an illusion. My dad leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the way a man does when he is trying to reconcile years of belief with a single moment of clarity. Another memory rose. I was 15. My grandma and I were hiking a small trail behind her property. She paused near a fallen log and handed me a heavy canvas backpack. "Carry it," she said. "Why?" "Because someone has to." It was heavier than I expected. My shoulders ached after a few minutes. When I asked how long we had to go, she gave the same answer every time. Far enough. Only later did I realize she had filled the pack with books. Oversized, unnecessary, heavy books. She watched me struggle and never offered to take it back, even when she asked me questions about school while I was trying to breathe. At the end of the trail, she finally let me drop it. "You learned something today," she said. "Probably not what you thought you would learn. But you learned what happens when weight is placed unfairly. Some people collapse. Some get stronger. Some start preparing for the next time." I remember standing there, hands on my knees, breathing hard. I had asked her why she made me do it. "One of you will be tested by abundance. One by absence," she said again. "And the one tested by absence will need strength that cannot be taught in comfort." When I asked which one of us that would be, she only smiled. "You already know." Back in the present, the air in the living room felt thick, like the pause between lightning and thunder. Vanessa shook her head slowly. "So that is it. I am a failure. You are the hero." I exhaled through my nose. Heroes were fairy tale inventions. This was something else entirely. "No, you are not a failure. And I am not a hero. We were prepared for different futures. Grandma hoped you would grow into responsibility. She prepared me for the day you did not." My mom's breath hitched. My dad looked at me as though seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Vanessa's voice rose again, sharp and wounded. "But she gave you nothing. She never praised you. She never celebrated you. She never made you feel special." "That is not true," I said. "She gave me something. She gave me the silence that teaches you to listen, the distance that forces you to think, the expectations that no one else noticed. She did not praise me because she was not training me for applause. She was training me for responsibility. Vanessa stared, speechless. Another memory came. I was 19, sitting with Grandma at her kitchen table. College acceptance letters spread across the surface. Vanessa had just been admitted to a private university, and the whole family had been celebrating. When my turn came, I told Grandma I planned to work through school instead of asking my parents for help. She studied me carefully and then said, "Strength earned is strength you never lose." At 19, I thought she was encouraging me. At 31, I knew she had been preparing me. In the living room, my mom suddenly covered her face with both hands and began to cry. My dad reached over and placed a stiff hand on her shoulder. Not sure if he was comforting her or steadying himself, she whispered through her fingers. "We never understood. We thought she was being hard on you. We thought Vanessa needed more attention. We thought that was love." I nodded once. I know. My mom dropped her hands and looked at me with a kind of grief that did not come from loss, but from realization. Why did she not tell us? Because knowing would have changed the outcome, I said softly, and the outcome was the lesson. Vanessa pressed her palm to her chest as though her heartbeat had become too loud. So I was never meant to handle the money. You were meant to learn how, I corrected, but you were never supposed to have it without learning. She let out a trembling breath. So what was I supposed to be? Loved, I said simply. Supported. Given chances, but not control. Not until you were ready. And Grandma did not believe you were ready. The room fell silent again, a different kind of silence. Not the silence of shock, not the silence of anger. This one felt heavier, older, like a truth that had been waiting for years to be spoken aloud. My grandma had seen everything long before any of us understood it. She had chosen her methods carefully. Her silence had not been absent. It was an instruction. I looked down at my own hands. Hands she had guided through ledgers and contracts. Hands she had trusted with weight too heavy for childhood. I was never the overlooked daughter. I was the prepared one, the backup child. Not the favorite, not the chosen in the way children dream of being chosen, but the one selected for the burden no one else noticed until it was too late. And I felt no bitterness in that acknowledgement, no resentment, no triumph, only clarity. Grandma had trained me for the role she knew the family would need. I had spent years thinking of myself as the afterthought. The truth was simpler and more complicated than that. I was the safeguard, the one shaped by absence, so I could withstand abundance without being altered by it. Vanessa sat slowly, as if something inside her had stopped fighting and started understanding. My mom wiped her eyes again. My dad remained still, the weight of everything settling on his shoulders. I took a breath, a quiet, steady one. "I accept it," I said, "not as punishment, not as a victory, simply as fact. I am the backup." The words settled in the room like dust, soft, but impossible to ignore. No one moved. Even the air felt still, as if the house itself understood something had shifted. Vanessa sat fragile and silent, her eyes unfocused. My mom's breathing hitched now and then, the way it does when a person is trying not to fall apart. My dad stared forward with the blankness of a man replaying years he could not change. Grant was the first to break. "All right, I think it is time I clarify a few things." He straightened in his chair, smoothing the front of his jacket. It was a small gesture, but it told me something important. He was preparing to separate himself from the mess. People like Grant always do that. They create distance when the truth gets too close. Vanessa looked up sharply. "Clarify what? You already humiliated me." He gave her a look that was not cruel, not kind, simply practical. "I did not humiliate you. I just spoke too fast. That was my mistake. But you deserve the full picture." I folded my arms and watched him. His tone had changed, less confident. Be more careful, like someone about to confess something that could either soften the room or fracture it further. "My name is Grant Holloway," he began. "I assume you all know that part. But what you do not know is what I actually do for a living." Vanessa stared as if bracing for a blow. "You said you work in finance." He let out a short breath. That was not a lie. It just was not specific. I'm a forensic accountant. My dad blinked. My mom's hands tightened again. Vanessa frowned. A what? Grant cleared his throat. A forensic accountant. I investigate financial misconduct. Fraud, coercion, hidden transfers, manipulated assets. I track money that is being misused or exploited. He looked at me then, and for a brief second, I saw something like respect flicker behind his eyes. Your firm knows my firm, Reed and Holloway Law. You have crossed paths with our partners before, although not directly. I narrowed my eyes. And what does this have to do with my sister? Everything, he said. Vanessa sat up straighter. What are you talking about? Grant rubbed the back of his neck, choosing his words. Let me be clear. I did not start dating Vanessa because of the trust. I did not even know the trust existed until recently. And even then, I misunderstood who controlled it, which is painfully obvious now. He gave an awkward half smile that no one returned. My mom frowned deeply. So why were you here? What did you want? Grant inhaled slowly. I was hired. That one sentence pulled every thread in the room tight. Vanessa's voice shook. Hired? By who? Reed and Holloway, he said. My firm. They assigned me to look into potential signs of financial manipulation involving beneficiaries of the Whitfield assets. My own chest tightened. Who signed the request? Grant hesitated, then looked at me. Your grandma. The room went silent again. Not the stunned silence from earlier. This one felt colder, more deliberate, like a door closing in slow motion. Vanessa started shaking her head violently. No, she would never. She trusted me. She loved me. She would not hire someone to spy on me. She did not hire anyone to spy, Grant said gently. She hired someone to protect. There is a difference. She flagged a concern 2 years before she died. A concern about outside influence, about people taking advantage of the family name or potential assets. He looked directly at Vanessa. You were not the only person she was worried about, but you were the youngest, and that made you vulnerable. Vanessa's expression cracked. Her breath came too fast. Her hands trembled in her lap. My dad stared at Grant with a mixture of suspicion and disbelief. So you investigated our family? Not exactly. Grant shook his head. I investigated activities around the family. People reaching into their finances. People offering too good to be true opportunities. People with patterns that matched prior fraud cases. I followed the behavior, not the bloodline. Vanessa flinched. What did you find? Grant hesitated. Not long, just long enough for the truth to become heavier. You were approached by 3 individuals last year who pitched business, opportunities requiring upfront liquidity. 2 of them had histories of fraud. 1 is still under investigation. You were told they could triple your returns in a month. They targeted you because of your social media presence, because you looked accessible, because you kept posting about wanting to launch something big. Vanessa's face was drained of color. Those were not scams. They were friends of friends. They were helping me build something real. Grant shook his head. No. They were waiting for the inheritance to drop. They were circling. And you were excited. You were enthusiastic. You trusted too quickly. That is not a flaw. It is a vulnerability, one your grandma saw coming long before you did. Vanessa buried her face in her hands. Stop talking. My mom leaned toward her, instinctively protective. My dad sat frozen, the shock settling deeper. I studied Grant quietly. So you dated her while investigating her? His face flushed. No, not exactly. I began the investigation before I knew her. The assignment was broad. I did not know their names. I was following patterns and online behavior. When Vanessa and I met, I recognized overlaps. I should have recused myself. I know that, but I genuinely liked her, and I thought maybe being close would help me understand whether she was being targeted or participating. My dad's eyes widened. Participating, as in willingly. Grant nodded once, yes. Some beneficiaries enter risky schemes knowingly. Some are pressured. Some genuinely believe they are about to strike gold. My job is to determine which is which. Vanessa's voice came muffled through her fingers. So what am I? Grant swallowed hard. You are someone who wants to succeed, and people use that against you. You were not malicious, but you were careless, and they saw an opportunity. She lifted her head slowly, tears streaking her cheeks. So you never loved me. The room held its breath. Grant's voice softened. I cared about you. That part is true, but I cannot pretend the assignment did not play a role in the beginning. I should have walked away. I should have told you everything. I did not. That is on me. Vanessa let out a sound, somewhere between a sob and a laugh, so I was never the prize. No, I said before Grant could answer. He looked at me, startled. So did everyone else. You were not the prize, Vanessa. You were the target. There is a difference. Vanessa stared at me, confusion twisting with pain. Grant is not the villain in this story. And he is not the hero. He is just another mirror. Another reflection of what Grandma already knew. Grant looked down at his hands, shame creeping in. I am not proud of it, he murmured. But I did my job. And your grandma wanted safeguards. She wanted to know you would not be trapped by the wrong people or the wrong promises. I nodded slowly. She built this trust as a fortress, not a gift. She knew abundance would attract predators. Grant lifted his gaze. It already did. Vanessa let out a trembling exhale, as if absorbing a truth she wanted, desperately to refuse. So what now? She whispered. I met her eyes and held them steady. Now you learn, not because you failed, but because you are not done growing. And because Grandma refused to let any of us be undone by money, we were not. Ready for. Vanessa closed her eyes and covered her mouth with her hand. My mom rubbed her back in slow circles. My dad stared at the floor, the weight of everything pressing down on him. Grant looked at me again. For what it is worth, he said quietly. Your grandma was right to choose you. She knew exactly what she was doing. I exhaled slowly. She usually did. The room fell into a calmer silence this time. A heavier, more thoughtful one. Not the shock from earlier. Not the anger. Something else. Recognition. Reflection. It struck me then that money had never been the center of all this. Not the vault. Not the trust. Not the inheritance. It was all just a structure she used to show us who we really were. Vanessa lifted her head finally, eyes red, voice thin. So she left you the duty. She left me the desire. And she left them blind. It was such a painfully accurate description that no one attempted to correct her. My throat tightened, not with emotion, with truth. Grandma did not leave us money, I said quietly. She left us mirrors. The sentence hovered in the quiet that followed, settling into the corners of the room like something none of us wanted to touch. No one argued. No one tried to fill the silence. It was the kind of stillness that comes after impact, when the dust has not yet decided whether to rise or fall. Eventually, they left. Not quickly. Not angrily, just slowly, like people walking out of a building that no longer felt familiar. My dad barely met my eyes as he stepped through the doorway. Vanessa walked ahead of them, head down, her movements fragile enough to be mistaken for surrender. Grant lingered last, offering a quiet apology with his eyes before following the others out. When the house finally emptied, the quiet felt heavier than the conversations that had filled it. The next morning, I locked the trust. It took exactly 13 minutes. A simple execution of an emergency clause Grandma had built into the document. I had reviewed it before, multiple times, but never executed. It was meant for moments where the risk of exploitation or financial harm outweighed the beneficiary's immediate interests. It required trustee discretion, legal justification, and documented evidence of undue influence. All of which I had. With a few keystrokes, the Whitfield Trust went into protective suspension. No distributions, no advances, no exceptions. Not until conditions were met. Not until stability could be proven. It was not revenge. It was policy. Word traveled faster than I expected. By the end of the week, I overheard two older men at the local coffee shop discussing how tragic it was that a once prominent family had lost control of their assets. They spoke as if they knew the details. They did not. They knew rumors, but rumors have a way of becoming their own kind of truth. My dad's reputation was the first to take a hit. He had always been proud of his position at the automotive plant, the seniority he had built, the respect he thought he had earned. But once the story reached people who liked to repeat information without verifying it, whispers started. Something about irresponsibility, something about money mismanagement, something about failing to guide his family. He never confronted me about it, but one afternoon, I drove past the plant and saw him sitting alone in his car long after his shift had ended, staring straight ahead, hands gripping the steering wheel as if holding the past in place. My mom retreated. She had always thrived in social circles, book clubs, neighborhood fundraisers, volunteer committees. But after the trust became the talk of their community, she stopped attending. The invitations slowed. Then they stopped entirely. I called her once that week. She answered. She said she was fine. She said she was just tired. She said it had nothing to do with gossip. None of it was true. Vanessa's world shifted in ways she did not expect. Her online following dropped once she stopped posting lavish outings and polished sponsorship photos. She tried posting about self-discovery and responsibility instead, but sincerity never performs as quickly as spectacle. A month later, she texted me a photo of a printed application. It was for a job at a small clothing store downtown. A regular job. A job where she would clock in, clock out, and earn the kind of money that came in hourly increments instead of grand gestures. She wrote under the photo, "I do not know if they will hire me, but I am trying." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Trying is enough for now. She did not respond, but she sent another photo a week later, this time of her new name badge. My parents started therapy, not together at first. My mom went because she felt like everything around her had cracked open. My dad went because the therapist told him it might help him understand why he had reacted the way he did. Eventually, they went to joint sessions. They did not tell me details, and I did not ask. Therapy only works when it belongs to the people doing it. For the first time in years, someone outside of the family asked them the questions they had avoided asking themselves. Why did you treat your daughters differently? What did you assume was true that was never examined? What part did you play in the patterns that led to this moment? I imagined. The silence that followed each question. The long breaths, the recognition, the regret. My mom called me after one session, her voice soft and careful. "We did not know how much we leaned on Vanessa," she said. "We thought we were supporting her. We thought you were fine on your own. We thought loving you meant not worrying about you." I listened because listening is often the only gift adult children can offer their parents, when regret comes too late. I told her I appreciated the honesty. And I meant it. But honesty and repair are not the same. Some fractures hold. Some fractures remain fractures even when the edges soften. I did not tell her that part. I saw my dad a few weeks later. He was sitting at a booth in the diner near their house, stirring a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He did not notice me until I stopped at the table. His eyes lifted slowly. "I did not know," he said, "about trust, about Grandma, about you." I nodded, maybe because there was nothing to add. He swallowed hard. I should have asked more questions. I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was surprisingly honest. My dad had never been a man who examined the past. He took things as they were presented, accepted the simplest version of truth, and moved forward. But now he was sitting with something larger than himself, something he could not fix with stubbornness or silence. We talked for a while. Not deeply, not emotionally. More like two people circling a conversation without stepping into the center. But it was enough. Or maybe I had stopped expecting anything more. At work, things continued as they always had. Clients came and went. Documents needed review. Court hearings took place on schedule. The world did not pause for the dissolution of my family roles. It never does. Some nights, I sat in my office long after sunset, looking through old trust documents. Not because I doubted my decisions, because I needed to remind myself that boundaries, once set, must be held. Vanessa called once to tell me she was tired. Not the dramatic kind of tired, the kind people feel when they are learning to stand on their own for the first time. "Do you hate me?" she asked quietly. "No," I said. She cried, softly. Not for me. For her. For the version of herself she had to leave behind. I never felt triumphant. Not once. There is no triumph in watching someone stumble toward adulthood long after. They should have learned to walk. But there was clarity. There was structure. There was honesty where illusions used to live. The trust stayed locked. Not as punishment, as protection, as stabilization, as time. 6 months passed. Not quickly, not slowly, just steadily, like a season turning without permission. My mom invited me to dinner, just her and me. She did not mention holidays or obligations or family expectations. She simply said she wanted to talk. I went. We ate quietly. She apologized again. And this time, she did not ask for forgiveness. She simply wanted me to know she saw things differently now. My dad started taking morning walks. My mom joined him sometimes. They spoke more gently to each other. I noticed that. Vanessa stayed at her job. She showed up on time. She learned how to speak to customers. She learned how to save money. She stopped looking for shortcuts. She stopped asking for handouts. She started asking questions instead. Hard questions. Smart ones. I began to understand that justice rarely arrives as satisfaction. It arrives as a consequence. It arrives as discomfort. It arrives slowly, in ways no one celebrates. People imagine justice as a kind of cleansing, a grand moment of rightness, a triumphant return to balance. But real justice is quieter. It reshapes lives in uncomfortable ways. It forces people to see things they avoided. It holds up mirrors no one asked for. And it comes with a cost. I lost the version of my family I once hoped for, the one where we understood each other. The one where love came easily. The one where roles were not so painfully uneven. But I gained something else. Space, boundaries, truth. Years from now, maybe we will be something resembling a whole. Maybe not. Some fractures never fully close. That is not a tragedy. That is honesty. As for the trust, it remained in its suspended state, waiting for the day the conditions would be met, waiting for stability, waiting for proof of growth, waiting for Vanessa to step into the future grandma once imagined for her, and me, the backup child, the one appointed to protect what others were not ready to hold. I understood something my grandma had known long before I did. Justice does not make anyone happy. It just puts things where they belong. A year passed quietly, the way snow melts in early spring, almost without permission. Nothing dramatic marked the time. No grand announcements or family breakthroughs. Just steady shifts. Small adjustments. The slow rearranging of a life that no longer revolved around proving anything to anyone. Vanessa's progress came in measured steps, never rushed, never performed. She kept her job at the clothing store longer than anyone expected, longer than even she expected. She showed up on time. She learned how to fold sweaters so neatly, the manager used her table as the example for new hires. She sent me a photo once of her first performance review, a simple printout with the words, "meets expectations." She added a short message. "I have never met expectations before." It made me smile, not out of pride, but out of recognition. She was learning to build a life from the ground up, something few people ever do with honesty. My parents changed in quieter ways. My mom apologized less and asked more questions. Real questions, not the kind that hide expectations inside them. She told me she had joined a small walking group in the neighborhood. No committees, no hosting, no roles to perform. Just people walking before the sun got too hot. My dad did not regain his old reputation at work, but I saw him soften in ways that surprised me. He stopped trying to solve every conversation with a shrug or a joke. He sat with discomfort instead of pushing past it. Once, over a late breakfast in a diner off the highway, he said he spent most of his life assuming the loudest child needed the most attention. Then he looked at me and said he wished someone had told him that quiet. Children need just as much. I did not tell him that I had wanted to hear that sentence 20 years ago. People do the best they can with what they understand. He understands more now. As for me, I kept my work steady, both in the office and outside it. I handled trust disputes, estate transitions, guardianship questions, all the complicated ways families try to hold themselves together when money and loyalty collide. I spent my weekends rebuilding spaces that would outlast me. A roof in need of reinforcement. A porch that needed new beams. An old house whose floor sagged under the weight of years. Wood responds to pressure honestly. People do not. I liked the contrast. Every so often I returned to Grandma's ledger books. The old ones she filled in by hand with a pencil and a ruler. Her handwriting had always been precise, not elegant, but deliberate. I flipped through the pages slowly, the way people read letters from someone they miss. In the back of one of the ledgers, she had written a note to herself. Not to me, not to the family. Just to herself. Teach her to stand alone so she can hold others up. She could have been either of us. Maybe she meant Vanessa once. Maybe she changed her mind. Maybe she meant both of us in different ways. But when I read it, I felt something settle inside me with the clarity of a truth I had always known but never named. I was not chosen to be loved loudly. I was chosen to be trusted quietly. There is a difference, a significant one. Love demands attention. Trust demands consistency. One can be given freely. The other must be earned and proven over time. My life has always bent toward the second. Grandma had not overlooked me. She had not underestimated me. She had prepared me, shaped me, sharpened me. Sometimes with patience, sometimes with silence, sometimes with weight I did not understand until much later. In the past year, saying no had become less of a burden and more of a boundary. Vanessa asked fewer things of me now, but when she did, she listened. She accepted the parameters of the trust with less resistance. She began taking financial literacy classes on her own. I saw fewer illusions in her eyes, more steadiness, more clarity, more self-awareness. The kind that comes only after life removes the cushions. My parents treated me differently too. Not reverently, not fearfully, just honestly. They asked for my perspective instead of my approval. They invited me over without expectation. They stopped presenting Vanessa as the daughter who needed support and me as the daughter who did not. They began to see us as separate women instead of roles in a story they had written long ago. Healing is not a straight line, and I never pretended it was. Some family dinners still felt uneven. Some conversations still felt too tender. Some silences still held old shadows. But there was movement. Not perfection, movement. On a cold afternoon in early December, nearly a year after the New Year dinner I had been uninvited from, I found myself back in Grandma's house, standing in the room where she used to keep her records. The windows were streaked with winter light, and the air smelled faintly of old paper and cedar. I opened the drawer where she stored her final letters and legal notes, the ones she intended for me to read someday. There was a message tucked inside a folded envelope. No date, no salutation, no signature. Just a short line in her handwriting. When the time comes, you will know why I chose you. I read it twice. Not because I did not understand it, but because I finally did. The trust had not been about wealth. It had been about stewardship, about responsibility, about the weight that comes with being the one who holds the key instead of the one who waits for the door to open. I was chosen to say no when no one else could. A strange tenderness washed over me then. Not grief, not triumph, just recognition. I had spent years wishing for the softness she gave my sister. But softness can weaken a foundation if it is given at the wrong time. She knew what she was building. She knew what she needed me to become. And she knew what Vanessa needed to lose before she could grow. I closed the drawer gently and stepped outside into the cold afternoon air. The light felt different somehow. Sharper, calmer, more mine. I walked to my truck, brushed off the thin layer of frost on the windshield, and sat behind the wheel for a moment before starting the engine. Some stories end loudly. Mine ended quietly, not with reconciliation, not with revenge, but with understanding. And for the first time, that felt like enough. As I pulled onto the road, snow began to drift across the pavement. I realized something with a clarity so clean it felt like stepping into new air. I was not chosen to be loved. I was chosen to be trusted. And trust, once earned, is its own kind of inheritance. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.